I'm Michael Pope.
I'm Thomas Bowman.
And this is Transition Virginia.
Michael, do you know which podcast genre is most popular these days?
Well, it's got to be like political commentary and news, right?
No, absolutely not news commentary.
What? It's not Transition Virginia? Well, then what the heck is it?
Get this. The most popular podcast genre is true crime.
True crime. Well, Virginia politics is full of true crime. Maybe we should do a true crime about Virginia politics.
That's exactly what we're doing today. This time, I've done some digging into an ongoing scandal, and you're going to hear it basically for the first time. And this is a doozy, so buckle in, everybody.
All right, I'm buckled and prepared for turbulence.
Okay, great. This story takes place in the coastal city of Virginia Beach, where a person who was the sitting member of the House of Representatives and a former Navy SEAL allegedly ordered his campaign staff to commit fraud so he could win re-election to a second term. This is the story of former Republican Congressman Scott Taylor. According to court documents, in June 2018, Lauren Peabody attended a meeting with other members of Virginia Beach Congressman Scott Taylor's campaign staff. Peabody, in her early 20s, is relatively inexperienced. If you're trying to get a mental image together, she's got blonde hair and a small frame. Congressman Taylor had called Lauren and the rest of his campaign staff to his Washington, D.C. office to discuss what their strategy should be after a woman named Sean Brown announced she would run for the office as an independent. That meeting included at least 3 other campaign staff in addition to Lauren, and Congressman Taylor, Roberta Marciano, Heather Guillot, and Taylor's campaign consultant, Rob Catron. Rob Catron worked at an Arlington PR firm, but he had been close with Scott Taylor ever since his first election to the House of Representatives in 2013, where Catron was on his staff. During that meeting, his campaign team decided to make what prosecutors said was a concerted effort to get Brown on the ballot.
Wait, hold up, Thomas. Concerted effort? What the heck does that mean?
Well, the campaign decided that as part of its election strategy, it would use its resources to help Brown get on the ballot by helping her collect a portion of the 1,000 signatures she needed to qualify. Now, what isn't clear is whether the campaign team already had the petitions in hand for this meeting or whether they just decided to collect them at the meeting. And that fact is actually a core question in this case.
But wait, why would they do that? Why would this campaign help a different campaign?
Well, Taylor faced stiff competition from Democratic candidate Elaine Luria that year. And in 2018, the Republican Party nationally was desperate to keep their majority in the House of Representatives. Polling indicated that Democrats were likely to win dozens of seats. And of course they did, thanks to waves of new activists energized by former President Donald Trump's historic unpopularity.
Okay, so Taylor's team believed that if they could get Brown on the ballot, enough people might vote for her and essentially take away votes from Luria, and that would leave Scott Taylor as the winner of the election? That's the plan?
Right. At least that's what lawyers for the Virginia Democrats allege.
Okay, but that's not a crime, right? I mean, you can collect petitions and you can collect signatures for whatever reason that you want. So how do we go from collecting petition signatures to prosecutors getting involved in this?
A few weeks later, around the 1st of August, a local public radio affiliate, WHRO, reported it had found 5 fraudulent signatures on petitions for Sean Brown. After WHRO published the story, independent audits by some other local press found over 50 fraudulent signatures on Brown's ballot petitions. By this time, the news is everywhere in the Virginia political world, and the state police launched their own investigation with the Virginia Beach Commonwealth's attorney, Colin Stolley. But there is one big problem. Colin Stolley's relative is Ken Stolley, the sheriff of Virginia Beach. And not only had Ken Stolley signed one of these petitions, but also he apparently circulated the petitions around the entire Virginia Beach Sheriff's Department. So Colin Stolley, the Commonwealth's attorney, decided to recuse himself. He asked a judge to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate the fraudulent petition signatures. The judge agreed and appointed a guy named Don Caldwell. He's the Commonwealth's attorney for Roanoke. This happened August 7th, so at this point they're moving pretty quickly. On September 5th, Special Prosecutor Caldwell announced investigators found not 5, not 50, but 377 fraudulent petition signatures. And the sworn witnesses were none other than Lauren Peabody, Heather Guillot, and Roberta Marciano. The agenda discussed at the June meeting that Lauren Peabody attended with Congressman Scott Taylor has led so far to 4 indictments, 3 guilty pleas, and an investigation of the entire campaign that remains ongoing.
So is there any evidence that Congressman Taylor and Sean Brown colluded on any of this?
At this point, Special Prosecutor Don Caldwell said he found, quote, no collusion between Taylor and Brown. And he laid out the facts of the case as we've presented here. And I should mention that supporting documents are available online, and we'll also link them in the description below. Caldwell told the Washington Post that what actually happened within the campaign headquarters is still a subject of investigation due to the lack of cooperation of key individuals.
Lack of cooperation?
That's right. At this point in the investigation, everybody involved pleaded the fifth. So when lawyers tried to subpoena Congressman Taylor, the judge quashed the motion, citing a statute that sitting members of Congress cannot be made to testify during the legislative session. Scott Taylor continues to deny all knowledge of any crimes, saying, quote, he was in D.C. when this all happened.
So Taylor says he did not know the signatures were forged, but that campaign meeting happened in his office in D.C., right?
Yeah, things are going sideways, even more sideways for Scott Taylor now. Lawyers for the campaign stipulated to the facts that this meeting did, in fact, take place. The campaign staff, however, all pled the fifth when asked specifically if Scott Taylor was directly involved.
So what did the judge do?
Well, Sean Brown, now the independent candidate, testified that she had no knowledge of the Taylor campaign's activities. She needed 1,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot and turned in over 1,100. However, since 377 of them were fraudulent, the judge removed Brown's name from the ballot altogether. But wait, there's more. According to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Brown had also used 3 false addresses on forms she submitted to gain access to the ballot. So Brown comes out of this smelling pretty fishy herself.
Now, wait, Thomas, my math is not great, but if she weren't involved, wouldn't that mean that she knew she didn't have the math? In other words, didn't have enough signatures to qualify for the ballot?
Well, it's possible, but not necessarily. Brown could very well have believed she was turning in more than 1,000 signatures, but later had some of them invalidated by the Department of Elections because the signers either didn't reside in the district or weren't registered to vote.
So what do we make of her comments here? Do we think she's telling the truth?
Well, as of right now, there's no evidence to think she's lying about this, but she is a convicted liar. Because 1 month later, in October 2018, Sean Brown was convicted of defrauding the USDA Summer Food Service Program of $800,000 back in 2012. She's currently serving her sentence for that, and fraud convictions do negatively impact your credibility.
So Scott Taylor lost that election to Elaine Luria in November. So what happened after that?
Overall, 2019 was a quiet year for the Taylor campaign, except for, of course, a few big things. In January, Trump appointed Scott Taylor as ambassador to Qatar. Trump said that Taylor had done consulting work in the country back in 2017 and 2018, and so he knew the local culture well. Now, during that time, Scott Taylor was a sitting congressman and apparently acting as a consultant to a foreign government. Later, it came out that Rudy Giuliani himself lobbied for Trump to appoint Taylor.
Why would Giuliani lobby Trump to appoint Taylor?
I actually got my hands on a copy of the DCCC's opposition research book for Scott Taylor. According to that oppo book, Giuliani thought Taylor would be a better fit for ambassador than a career diplomat because he was more supportive of Trump's agenda. Giuliani met with Taylor and offered to help usher him through the nomination process, and Taylor claimed that Trump approved of the nomination. A lobbyist for the Qatari government reached out to Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's office the day that news of Taylor's nomination was leaked to the press. Trump had abandoned the nomination of a career diplomat in favor of Scott Taylor.
But Taylor never became ambassador, right?
Taylor was ultimately never nominated, and the position was left unfilled. As far as Taylor goes, this isn't his first time with shady foreign dealings. After Taylor lost re-election, he reported income from businesses associated with Qatar and other controversies. In 2019, Taylor reported income from Stonington Global LLC, a firm headed by someone named Nick Muzzin. Muzzin did work for the Qatari government. He was associated with Michael Flynn, and he'd been scrutinized for being paid for foreign lobbying work through a, quote, shadow firm. In 2018, Muzzin was accused of participating in an alleged Qatari conspiracy to steal and distribute a Republican donor's private emails to embarrass him. In 2017, Stonington Global LLC registered to lobby for the Democratic Party of Albania. Their president was charged with money laundering in 2019. And according to a FARA filing, Taylor met with Muzzin's clients, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Interior for the Qatari government, as a member of Congress. Also in 2019, Taylor reported income from Espada Inc. They're a security and logistics support company that was accused of encouraging vigilantism in 2010 and was sued by a paramedic in 2019 for not paying wages.
Thomas, all this stuff sounds really, really shady.
I've got a feeling there's a lot more to this story given the people involved. But let's get back to the case at hand. On May 7, 2019, the special prosecutor filed charges against Lauren Peabody for 2 counts of election fraud. He also refused to say whether Taylor had broken the law when the press asked him that directly. In July, Taylor announced he would run for Senate against Mark Warner, but later withdrew in December to run for his old congressional seat. That set up a rematch against now Representative Elaine Luria. And that's when this case really starts to heat up for Scott Taylor. The bottom drops out for Taylor in 2020. At the beginning of March, Lauren Peabody pled guilty to, quote, willful neglect of election duties for failing to actually witness the petition signatures herself. She got a plea deal because her attorneys say that she wasn't actually the one who collected the fraudulent signatures. The judge sentenced Peabody to a suspended sentence of 12 months with no jail time and a $1,000 fine. A week later, Special Prosecutor Caldwell charged a second campaign staffer, Roberta Marciano, with 2 counts of election fraud. By now, Luria's running attack ads against Taylor all day long, hitting him for the convictions and the accusations. Taylor responded in August by sending her a cease and desist letter.
I'm assuming she ignored the cease and desist letter.
Apparently so. I actually spoke to a person who worked on this campaign, and they said it was interpreted as a desperate legal ploy and quickly made moot, which I'll come back to. Also, at some point in mid-2020, the special prosecutor changes from Don Caldwell to the Assistant Commonwealth Attorney for Virginia Beach, John Beamer.
Why did the prosecutor switch?
That's the one thing I really couldn't find an answer to. I'm not sure why they switched, but my personal guess is that it's no longer an issue to have someone underneath Colin Stolley overseeing the investigation, since the sheriff's signatures were apparently legitimate.
So on the issue of signatures, I remember that some of those names of the signatures ended up being kind of interesting names, right?
There were some interesting signatures forged. Some of the signatures were from dead people. Some notable living people who claim the Taylor campaign forged their signatures include sitting delegates Glenn Davis and his wife, as well as Barry Knight.
Forging the signatures of sitting elected officials, that's pretty bold.
That's very bold. That's part of what makes this story so fascinating to me, Michael. Why did the campaign feel comfortable forging signatures of people who the press would definitely have followed up with when they audited those petitions?
I don't know. Why would they?
Right. That's why it's so fascinating. So then the investigation goes quiet again over the summer, and we'll find out later that the prosecutor spent that time negotiating a similar plea deal with Marciano. But first, on September 9th, the new special prosecutor, John Beamer, charged Heather Guilloux with making false statements and felony election fraud. At this point, Beamer says everyone on Taylor's campaign staff remains under investigation. And he specified that Scott Taylor was part of that campaign. That specific development is what made the cease and desist letter from Taylor's campaign to Loria's a moot point.
So by September 2020, which is only 2 months before the election, Taylor is under investigation. Is that right?
Yes. Beamer went out of his way to say Taylor was under investigation because up until that point, Scott Taylor continued to deny any knowledge of the criminal conspiracy, and he was spinning the events as him acting swiftly to fire the people responsible after their actions came to light, which nobody disputes he fired them after they got caught. To me, it seems like he's fired them because they got caught, and he needed to deflect liability away from his campaign. Because right after that, Roberta Marciano, the second campaign staffer, pled guilty, also to woeful neglect of election duties.
Okay, so what's our scorecard here? Peabody and Marciano are convicted after taking the plea deal. Heather Guilloux is indicted on the same charges Peabody and Marciano originally were indicted for. Is that kind of where we are at this point?
That's where we are at this point. In September 2020, there are 3 indictments and 2 convictions against Taylor's campaign staff.
Okay, so a few months later, in November 2020, former Congressman Taylor lost a second time to Elaine Luria. But the whole time, he had that cloud hanging over his head, right? Didn't that make the second election kind of difficult for him?
Yeah, and I think the clues in the initial 2018 court filing, where the judge said a sitting congressman couldn't be subpoenaed while Congress was in session. At this point, Taylor knows the prosecutors are closing in, and you don't want to be the person that prosecutors don't offer a plea deal to.
A congressman can't be subpoenaed while Congress is in session?
According to the judge, yeah. So fast forward to this year, 2021. On March 30th, Guilloux pled guilty to falsifying election petitions, also under a similar plea deal.
Okay, so we've got 3 people who have taken 3 former staffers, campaign staffers, who have taken the plea deal. What about the other guy?
Rob Catron. This is the campaign consultant that Scott Taylor referenced when he said he fired the people responsible back in 2018. Specifically, Taylor said he did it when his actions came to light. Catron was in Scott Taylor's inner circle and had worked for him since his first election in 2013.
So what happened to him?
On June 21st, 2021, the special prosecutor indicted Catron on 10 counts of making a false statement and felony election fraud.
10 counts of election fraud and making false statements. That's a lot more than the plea deals, which essentially ended up being a misdemeanor. So why so much more serious for this guy?
Right. Well, we're recording this just before Thanksgiving 2021, and this is where the case stands today. If the prosecutors are really after Taylor, then we might expect to see a similar plea bargain and conviction for Catron in the coming months. unless he's one of the big fish.
Well, so are there more shoes to drop with this case?
There's nobody else mentioned in the available court documents, but recall how I consulted someone on Loria's campaign? This person said key members of Taylor's official Hill staff were also at that meeting, including at least his chief of staff. Catron stayed out of court records up until this year, so it is possible there's more people involved.
But it's also possible that there aren't more people involved, right?
And, of course, there's still Scott Taylor. At this point, it seems like prosecutors are working their way up the chain to Scott Taylor, as everyone else in that meeting has been indicted or convicted.
Well, Thomas, this has been fascinating. Thanks for researching this case to keep us up to date on this story. Now, we want to be responsible consumers of true crime. We should probably stress this is still an active investigation, so more information could come to light, and probably will, that could change the trajectory of this case.
That's right, Michael. And the local Commonwealth's Attorney's Office in Virginia Beach has a number for you to call if you've got any relevant information to the case. That number is 757-385-4401. Again, call 757-385-4401 if you've got information relevant to the case. This was the story of former Congressman Scott Taylor.
Thanks for listening to Transition Virginia. If you like what you heard, give us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the show. We'll be back next week, so subscribe to the show so you don't miss a single episode.
Transition Virginia is produced by Jackleg Media, LLC.